In this tutorial, I'm going to be covering how to make a circular name badge or logo, just like the one shown right here. And there are two fonts used in the creation of this logo or badge that you're going to want to download before you start. So this one right here is called Sedgwick Co. And this one that says Walden is called Beba's New. So check out the description of this video and download and install both of those fonts before beginning here, because you're going to need them moving forward. Alternatively, you can replace these fonts with whatever it is you want to use. So feel free to change them up if you want to, but if you want to closely match what I'm doing, you're going to want to get both those before getting started here. And also something to note, I'm going to list all the keyboard shortcuts that I use in this tutorial in the description, so if you want to check that out, if you want to either write those down or just have a reference point for them as you're working, just check out the description and you should find everything in there that you're going to need to use as we move forward here. So the first part of this name badge or logo that we're going to create right here is the center part that says WW, and you'll of course replace the letters WW with your own initials or word or even something like an icon or illustration. Whatever it is you want to do in there, you can feel free to do, but I'm just going to match what I did right here. So the font for those W's is once again Sedgwick Co. So the first thing you want to do is hit T on your keyboard to bring up the type tool. It looks like a T on your toolbar if you want to click it instead, and then just click somewhere on your artboard so you can go ahead and start typing out your letter W. So then I'm going to hit the black arrow right here, the selection tool, so it selects this letter that we just made, and in this character window up at the top here, it says Myriad Pro right now. I think that's the default font for Illustrator. I'm just going to click that so it highlights it and start typing Sedgwick, so S-E-D, and that'll automatically bring a little search thing here where I can just click on that font and it will automatically apply. Alternatively, you can use the drop down if you want to, but I find using the little search window up here is just a little bit faster. And some windows you're going to want open before beginning this as well. Make sure window and then stroke near the bottom here is open. Window appearance near the top is open, and then go to type and then character and make sure that is also open. All these things will be super helpful moving forward. So this letter right here is 97 point on my particular example here, so I'm going to make this one 97 point as well for the font size. I can either do that up at the top here by just typing in 97 and hitting enter, or go to the character window and right here where it has a little TT for size, set the font size. I can type 97 in there. Alternatively, you can just use this little grabber tool to resize or rescale this. Just make sure you're holding shift when you do that so it maintains proportion. If you don't, it can stretch out and really distort quite quickly. So if you want to match this video exactly, you can use 97. If not, feel free to use whatever value you think looks the best. So to copy this letter and make another one, I'm just going to hold down Alt on a PC or Option on a Mac, and then click and drag this letter off to the side here until it matches somewhat closely to my example, and then I'm going to let go. If you want to change this letter to something else, which you'll probably want to do, just hit T on your keyboard, highlight the letter, and then type a different letter. So if you type in a B, for example, you can go ahead and do that quite easily and just kind of align this however you see fit. Alternatively, you can do them in a row as well, like I did on this one right here where the M and the B are sort of connected. So if you want to do that, you could type out your two letters right here and then just highlight over the first one, and then in the character window there is something called tracking, which looks like a VA with a line pointing both left and right. So highlight the first letter and then make that tracking a negative number. The number will have to be different depending on how big the letters are. So I'm making this one negative 150, but that value might have to change depending on how big or small you made your font. The smaller the font, the smaller that value will have to be. The bigger the font, the larger the value. It kind of makes sense. So you can also do it this way if you want to as well, if you want to make them in a row or type out an entire word. It's kind of up to you how you want to do that. But the next step here is to create this rounded rectangle right here that encompasses our two letters. And very quickly, we want to make sure we have no fill selected. So fill right here is currently set to none for me, but it might be white for you. So if it is white, just click on it one time, and then just below that to the right there's a little box that will say none. It looks like a white box with a red line going diagonally through it. Just click that and then click on the fill, which looks like a square with a square missing in the middle, and you can double click on that to change the color of the fill to something else if you don't want to use black. Otherwise you can just leave it as is. So in the toolbar here there's a rectangle tool that you want to click and then hold, and we want to select the rounded rectangle tool. and I'll show you a different way of doing this in Adobe CC in just a second as well. But just draw a rounded rectangle around these letters that we drew right here and then let go. And for your reference, the stroke on this is supposed to be 8 point, so you can change your weight down to 8 point in the stroke window that I had you open up earlier. It's window and then stroke kind of near the bottom here. You can make it as big or as small as you want, so don't really worry about that. And actually, very quickly, I'm going to have us change a setting in Illustrator to make it stop scaling effects for things like stroke as you resize this. So you can very quickly resize this and the stroke value won't change. To do that, just go to Edit, and then Preferences, and then General. And there's an option called Scale Strokes and Effects. If it's checked, when you make a stroked item either bigger or smaller, the stroke will automatically become bigger or smaller with it. When it's unchecked, it will always be the same exact size that you set it to. So I'm going to leave mine unchecked. You can decide how you want to work, if you want to scale as you scale your items or not, but that's where it is. It's under Edit and then Preferences and then General. So I'm just going to zoom in really quick here and then shrink this up a little bit so that it more closely matches the one example I have to the left right here. So there's just a little bit less room between the box and the actual letters. I'm just grabbing these different points so it brings up the scale tool and then either pushing it in or pulling it out as I see fit to kind of make it look somewhat decent. I'm not going to spend a ton of time making sure this is perfect, but I'm just going to try to get it relatively close. This one goes in a little bit, and just be careful not to accidentally select your letters when you're in here doing this, because then you'll actually end up scaling those along with this outside border. And I'm going to quickly show a cool feature in Adobe Illustrator CC or newer. So if I just click this right here, and then I'm going to zoom in a little bit by hitting Control plus on a PC or Command plus in a Mac. To zoom out is Control minus on a PC or Command minus on a Mac. That's just a really quick way to zoom in and out. There's these little circular buttons right here that if you click, hold, and drag inwards, it'll actually make the rounded corners more rounded, or if you click and drag and then push it out, it'll make them less rounded. So that's a really easy way to go in here and adjust these rounded corners. Alternatively, you can hit M on your keyboard for the rectangle tool, or just click and hold and make sure your rectangle tool is selected in the toolbar. So I'm going to quickly draw a rectangle tool here just to show you how this will look. So you don't have to use the rounded rectangle tool to make rounded corners on a rectangle. I'm going to hit V so that my black arrow or selection tool is selected. Just go to one of these little circles here in the corner, click, hold, and then drag it in. And as you can see, it's a very quick and easy way to round your edges. So if you don't want to use the rounded rectangle tool and you just want to use the rectangle tool and have a bit more control that way, feel free to do it that way. There's two different ways you can do that. The main difference here is I think you need Illustrator CC or newer to have this as an option. So now we have this main center point done and pretty much ready to go. So I'm just going to highlight everything, kind of move it down here a little bit so everything isn't in the way. Next up, we're going to do this type on a path right here that says Walden Walrus. In your case, you're going to want to change that type to be whatever it is you want to say. Although I will say it will look better if the two words are roughly equivalent in length. I'll show you some tricks to make things look a little bit more evenly spaced out if you're using words that aren't all that close together, but these two are pretty much the same length overall, so this one tends to look pretty good. But in order to do this, you first have to draw a circle using the ellipse tool. So you can hit L on your keyboard to bring up the ellipse tool, or you can click and hold over the shape tool right here and then select ellipse tool. It's usually the third one down from this menu. And then I'm just going to move over here, and I'm holding spacebar to bring up the grabber hand so I can grab around my screen and move. Once again, just hold down the spacebar, and that's a very quick way to zoom around your artboard here. So I'm going to start drawing a circle here, and then I'm going to hold Shift when I'm drawing that circle so the circle maintains a perfect circle. If you don't hold Shift, as you can see here, it doesn't stay a perfect circle, so you don't want to do that. Just hold down Shift and make sure it stays perfect. So this looks relatively decent enough to get started with the type right here. And the type we're going to be using on this is called Beba's New. So that's what we're going to be making this type out of. Once again, like I said before, if you want to use a different font, feel free to do it. All the more power to you. That's cool if you want to change this up. So we need the type on a path tool for this step. So we want to go over the T icon in the toolbar for the type tool, and then click and then hold. And then from that menu, you want to select type on a path tool. Once that is selected, we want to go over to our circle right here, and then on the path, just click once, which will start typing this out. So I'm going to type in the word Walden. And as you can tell, this is really large and in the wrong font, but we can switch that quite easily. So I'm just going to hit my selection tool, which is the black arrow on my toolbar here, very quickly. I didn't press V for the shortcut because I didn't want to type in the letter V instead of using the actual shortcut. I do that to myself all the time, so just kind of be mindful of that when you're using type. So up here in the character window, I'm just going to highlight over this and type in BEB, so Beba's New is selected in the search here, and just click that. And as you can tell, this is tracked together very, very closely because I had a negative value when I was doing these W's. So I'm going to go to my character window very quickly and then over to the tracking, which is this VA with the line pointing left and right. If you highlight over it, it'll say set the tracking. So I'm going to make this something different, like let's say 100 for now, because I think this one is roughly something like that. This one's set to 400 actually. And this font on the word Walden for me is set to 42 point. So I'm just going to highlight over this and change my type here to be 42 point. And then I'm also going to match the overall tracking that I have on this top version, so these are a little bit closer together. So this one is 400, so I'm just going to highlight this with a selection tool, go over to tracking, and then make this 400 as well. You're going to have to change these values as you're working to make sure things look right. But like I said, I'll go through that in just a second here. So now we need to do the one on the bottom, which requires a little bit different way of doing this. So I'm going to highlight over this one that we just made, and then hit Control-C on a PC or Command-C on a Mac, and then Control-F on a PC or Command-F on a Mac, which just copies and then pastes it in the exact same place. And then I'm going to hover over one of these corners here, the either corner on the top left or right or the center here, it doesn't really matter, until my icon becomes this arrow pointing left and right that signifies a rotate tool. So I'm going to rotate this down to the bottom here, not worrying about it being perfectly centered, and just let go. And with this still selected, if you click off of it for some reason, just make sure you click back on this bottom type right here. We need to go to type and then type on a path, and from type and then type on a path, we're going to go to type on a path options. So there's a little button here called flip. That's really the only thing that we have to worry about. If you want to see it happen in real time, you can click preview if you want. So as you can see, it flips the type from being on the outside of the circle to the inside of the circle. So that's what we wanted to achieve here, so I'm just going to hit OK. One thing you might want to note here though is that on this type, it's no longer really on the same path as this type on the top. So if you were to just bring this down to the bottom here and then make this 2 circles around it, those circles wouldn't line up properly. So there's kind of a pretty easy trick to make things line up a little bit better. So what I'm going to do is grab one of the 4 corners here of this type on a path, which will bring up the scale tool, and then hold down Alt on a PC or Option on a Mac, which makes it scale from the center, and also hold Shift so it stays in a perfect circle. And then make sure this top blue line, as you can see right here, there's the blue line that circles my type, showing the path that it's on. The top blue line we want to be on the top points of the type above it that says Walden or whatever you happen to write out. This doesn't have to be 100% exact, but just try to make it relatively close. When you do that, just let go. So now we have our type on the bottom here. That's roughly on the same path as the type on the top here, at least visually on the same path, although it's on a different path completely. And to make this type match the scale of the type on the top here very, very quickly, we can just hit I on our keyboard for the eyedropper tool, or you can go over to the toolbar here and click on the eyedropper if you want to select it that way instead, and then just click once on the type on the top, and it will automatically copy those styles. So now these are both the same font size, and then I can then go in here and kind of make sure this is relatively centered at the bottom. Pretty easy to do that. So the next step here are these 2 lines on the bottom and the top of the type that we've created. And to make sure everything's nicely centered very easily, we want to use something called Smart Guide. So I have that on already. So as you can see right here, as I highlight over the path, it has a little green word that might be really hard to see on your screen, but it lets me know that I'm on that path. And if I go to the center of this, it might take me just a second to find it. If I keep going right here, I'll just select this. I highlight over the center point, it lets me know that I'm on the exact center of this path where it says center in green. So that'll be really helpful for this next step. So we're going to want to select once again the ellipse tool on the toolbar. You can hit L on your keyboard to go ahead and select that. And then after hitting Control U on a PC or Command U on a Mac to turn on Smart Guides, if you already have them on, don't do that because it will turn them off. Once again, it's Control U on a PC or Command U on a Mac for the Smart Guides. We're going to hover over the center point right here. And if you want to find that center point even easier, just highlight over this type right here, and then this center point will be marked by the blue dot. And then when you're exactly over it, it'll bring up the Smart Guide saying center. So once again, I'm going to hit L to bring up that circle tool, or ellipse tool actually. I'm going to click and hold, and when I'm dragging this, you want to make sure you hold Alt on a PC or Option on a Mac so it drags from the center, and also hold Shift so it maintains a perfect circular form. and it's acting kind of weird. It has like a visual bug right here, but as you can see, this line is now being drawn on the outside of the Walden words, which reminds me I have to change Walden on the bottom to say walrus. But it made a black fill instead of a black stroke. So I'm going to hit Shift and then X to just flip these really quick. Alternatively, you can click on the fill, once again hit that none button, and then double click on that stroke to make it whatever color it is you want it to be. And I happen to know this stroke needs to be 8 point, so I'm going to go over to my stroke window here and change the weight while that's still selected up to 8 point. So right now we're at 8 point. And now we just need to make the inner circle, but first I'm going to actually double click on this type on the bottom here and change it to say walrus instead of Walden, so it doesn't say Walden. We need to make sure we get walrus in there, which is always an important thing to consider. So next up, we're just going to duplicate this outer circle to become an inner circle, just to save us a little bit of time. So I'm going to hit Control C on a PC or Command C on a Mac, and then Control F on a PC or Command F on a Mac to duplicate that. And then I'm going to hold down Alt and Shift or Option and Shift on a Mac and just scale this on the inside here so it's both scaling from the center and staying a perfect circle. If you need to make slight adjustments, just make sure you continue holding down Alt or Option on a Mac and Shift so that it maintains that perfect circle as well as being changed from the exact center point. If you find that when you scale these your stroke size is changing, you can always just hit I on your keyboard and then click on the stroke above it to make it match that exact size. Go to your stroke window and change the stroke there to make sure they're both the same, or go to Edit and then Preferences and then General and make sure Scale Strokes and Effects is not checked. But now we're actually getting very close to being done here, so I'm just going to zoom out really quick. So next up we want to align this right here with the WW badge we made previously. So I'm just going to use the selection tool, which is the black arrow or V on your keyboard. I'm going to select this entire thing and then just start dragging it over this. And when I get to the middle here, it's actually going to let me know that I'm on the center point. It's saying intersect right now, so I'm just going to let go and then zoom in a little bit so you might be able to see that better. But as you drag this stuff around right here, it should tell you as you get to that middle intersecting point if you have smart guides on. Otherwise, you can just use your eyes and try to do it visually if you want to work that way instead. So I'm actually going to grab the center here and just drag it to the center, which is probably the best way of doing that because then you know you're both pulling from this center point right here and then you're bringing it right over the center point of this object right here as well. So I'm going to let go and this is now pretty much perfectly centered. So the next thing I want to do is just hold Alt on a PC or Option on a Mac with all this still selected and then hold Shift as well. And then with my cursor in one of the corners here, so the scale tool is currently active, I'm going to start shrinking this down a little bit until this more closely matches the example that I have on the left side right here. So I'm going to make this even a little bit smaller. As you can tell, as I'm scaling this down, my type is also shrinking. So I'm going to show you a quick tip. It's actually slightly complicated, but not too bad to make sure that the type now lines up perfectly once again when we're done, because we want to make sure that we do all this stuff before we end up chopping these things out of the middle right here. So I'm going to highlight both of these text boxes right here on the top and the bottom so they're both selected. And I forget what size this was supposed to be. I'm going to click on this one. So 42 point in my case, but you can make them as big or as small as you want. And if you actually like this scale, you can feel free not to change it, but I just think this tip is worth sharing. And you hold Shift while clicking on multiple things to select multiple things if you didn't know that. So you can hold Shift and then click individual items, as many of them as you want, and it will continue selecting more and more items so long as you're holding Shift. So I'm going to bring this font size up to 42 point right here, so they're both 42. But something really important to note, first I'm going to actually make this outer stroke here a little bit bigger so it isn't covering the type. I'm holding Alt on a PC or Option on a Mac as well as Shift as I do that. So this bottom type is no longer this path. Like I said before, you really want the top line of this blue line right here to match up with the top of this type, which this is kind of a rough way of making sure that these two type paths are on the same thing. So I'm going to grab with this bottom type selected with the selection tool, which is the black arrow. I'm going to grab this top point right here for resize, hold down Alt on a PC or Option on a Mac as well as Shift, and then just drag this up until it matches the top edges right here of that font. And as you can see, it went ahead and increased my font to 44.64 point. So to make it once again match the word Walden, I'm going to hit I on my keyboard and just click on it, which will very quickly match that font style. So now we're getting pretty close here. I need to adjust these stroke lines very quickly to scale. So hold Alt or Option and then Shift and just keep on scaling these down until they are appropriate to have a nice and pretty even distance between them and the type. So right here is looking relatively close. I'm not going to try to spend a ton of time on this to make it absolutely perfect. I just want it to look somewhat decent for the purpose of this video. So next up, I'm going to actually just click on the top type, bring my selection tool, which is the black arrow, to one of these corners, so I can bring up a little rotate tool, which is an arrow pointing left and then down, and just kind of rotate this a little bit. In this case, my type is overlapping this center badge part a little bit. So I'm going to go over to tracking, which is currently set to 400, and make it something like 300, and then readjust this as I see fit. So that's one way you can kind of adjust your type if you're using longer or shorter words. Throwing the tracking to be either smaller or larger is a really quick way to make it just a little bit better or fit just a little bit better. So next up, I'm going to click the word walrus on the bottom and then rotate this one until it's looking pretty much centered. So this one already fits pretty well. So now we're actually basically done with this. I know it doesn't look like it because we have these weird intersecting lines, but we're at pretty much the done point of doing this. So there's two different ways that you can go ahead and do this as far as knocking these center lines out. I'm going to show you both ways. So the first way will be the quick way. I'm just going to very quickly highlight everything and duplicate it off to the bottom so we can do these without worrying about overwriting our previous work. So I'm going to hold down Shift and click on each one of these W's as well as this rounded rectangle stroke line right here. And I'm going to right click it, go to Arrange and bring to front, so that these things are up in the front here. I'm also going to click on each one of these two letters after I do that and then right click it, arrange, bring to front, because I want these letters to be in front of this rounded rectangle. And I'm going to give my rounded rectangle a white fill this time. So I'm going to double click on my fill, set it to be white, and then it goes ahead and does that. So now we don't have those weird lines running through it and looking like it's kind of a broken design. So that's one way you can go in and do that and achieve this look. Alternatively, we can use the cut tool and just manually cut these out of the way. So to use the cut tool, you just want to hit C on your keyboard, or to actually go over to the scissors icon, it's actually called the scissors tool. I call it the cut tool a lot because it has C as a shortcut. So that's a pretty easy way to remember the shortcut. If you want to cut, hit C. And what you want to do is make sure you're over the path of this stroked line that you want to cut this section in the middle right here out of. And then on the path right here where it's intersecting and you show all the bars as being blue, if you have smart guides on, that makes it really helpful. You just want to click once to cut a new point in. If you see that a point has been cut on this rounded rectangle instead, just hit Control Z on a PC or Command Z on a Mac to step backwards and then try it again. So make sure you just cut the intersecting point on where the stroke lines are intersecting the stroke lines of each other. And then when you're done and it highlights this middle section right here, just hit backspace twice, which will delete all the points. And then do the same thing right here for the middle. So I'm going to very quickly cut these points right here and just make sure when it says intersect, this green line isn't showing, because when, at least in my experience, it's a green line that says intersect, it's going to cut the rounded rectangle and not the circular one. So I'm just going to try to move this until it looks like this, and then it cuts out this middle section, which is currently highlighted, and then hit backspace twice. So I'm going to do the right side now. Once again, same steps. Just hit C on your keyboard for that cut tool if it isn't selected, and make sure, in this case I accidentally clicked on the rectangle instead of the circle, so I'm going to hit Control Z on a PC or Command Z on a Mac and try to do this once again. So this time when I did it, it actually highlights this point at the bottom, which is something I don't want to remove. So to remove the point that you actually want to remove, we want to use the direct selection tool, which is the white arrow here in your toolbar. It's A as a keyboard shortcut. And then you just want to click on that point that you want to delete, hit backspace twice. And why I say hit backspace twice is because if you only hit it once, as you can see, it kind of cuts out a fragmented section, where if you hit it twice, it cuts everything out that you wanted to actually remove. So I'm going to hit C on my keyboard once again for that scissors tool, and then knock out this final little section right here so we can be done with this. So I'm just going to line this up until I get to that intersect point, hit A on my keyboard for that direct selection tool, select this path in the middle, hit backspace twice, and then zoom out to kind of check out what we've done. So now we're pretty much done here, and as you can see, it's a pretty close match to the example that I had set out. Of course, you'll change this type to be whatever it is you want it to be. And like I said before, if you want to make this look a little bit better and fill out the space more, I'd suggest using the character window, which is under Window and then Type and then Character, and then specifically the tracking, which looks like a VA with a line pointing left and right. Adjust this number to be bigger or smaller to make sure that it fills this out. You might have to kind of rotate things just a little bit here to make sure that it continues staying centered as you're doing that. but the tracking will do a really nice job of helping your words fill out a little bit more without having to increase the size. And you can also use tracking to highlight a letter individually and then either make that tracking bigger or smaller to kind of kern these letters out a little bit. It's one of the only ways that you can go ahead and do that when you're using type on a path. If you use the touch type tool, it kind of freaks out and just moves it perfectly like left or right, and it will break the path. So using tracking to kern your letters is probably the easiest way. Just remember, if you highlight a specific letter by using the type tool and highlighting it, the tracking will always affect the letter in front of it, not the letter behind. So if I make the tracking really something like, let's say 600 points right here, just to prove a point pretty much, it'll throw this letter L out a whole bunch because it's creating a bunch of space in front of that letter A. So when I highlight the letter A, it shows all that additional space that I just created. But that's really it for this tutorial. I do hope you found it helpful. If stuff moved a bit quick, I'd suggest just re-watching those points and checking out the description where I'll list out all the different shortcuts. I didn't want to make this video too long, so I went relatively fast, but I do hope you found it helpful. So if you did find it helpful, please hit like and favorite. And if you want to see stuff like this every week, please subscribe. I do my best to keep new content just like this coming out every week for designers and illustrators. Thanks so much for watching.